She demands a VIP table and humiliates the waiter, assuring him that she knows the owner personally, but she has no idea who's in front of her. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. The scent of saffron, aged oak, and a hint of white truffle lingered in the softly perfumed air, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the distant clink of cutlery. Velvet curtains framed expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park's southern edge, casting golden reflections on the polished marble floors. The chandeliers above glowed with a warm, amber light, suspended like floating galaxies in the cathedral high ceiling. The restaurant, Heritage, was not merely a place to eat, it was an experience, an institution. And, for the city's elite, it was a badge of access, a place where reservations were made months in advance, if they could be made at all. Behind the elegance and seamless service lay the quiet force of Marcus Raines, the owner and visionary behind Heritage. Tall, impeccably dressed, and composed with a quiet intensity, Marcus had built his culinary empire not from inherited wealth or old-world privilege, but from calloused hands and years of tireless effort. Born in a forgotten pocket of Atlanta, raised by a single mother and a father who worked back-breaking hours as a short-order cook, Marcus grew up understanding the value of labor. He knew hunger, not only of the body, but of the spirit. It was this hunger that had driven him to pursue culinary school with scholarships, to sweep floors in Parisian kitchens, and to eventually open the doors of Heritage with his own money and an uncompromising vision. Despite now being one of the most respected restaurateurs in the country, Marcus still worked the floor on select nights, not out of necessity, but out of pride and precision. He liked to see the guests with his own eyes, to observe how each plate was received, how the energy in the room flowed, how his team moved as one. On this particular evening, a Friday nearing the end of the spring season, the restaurant was filled with the usual crowd: power couples, Broadway stars, discreet politicians, and jet-set socialites. Marcus had chosen to greet guests personally, dressed in his custom-tailored midnight blue jacket, a soft pocket square tucked precisely into the breast pocket. He had just finished escorting a couple to their seats near the wine library when he noticed the commotion at the entrance. The host had stepped aside with a tight smile, allowing Marcus to intercept the approaching guests himself. The group was composed of 4 women. 3 of them trailed behind the 4th, a woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a taut bun, her eyes shielded by oversized designer sunglasses despite the hour. She carried herself with theatrical self-importance, her stiletto heels clicking against the floor like the beat of a war drum. Her handbag alone, Marcus noted without surprise, could pay the rent for one of his dishwashers for 6 months. "I'll take it from here," Marcus said calmly to the host and stepped forward. The woman immediately locked eyes with him and offered a bright, fake smile that didn't reach her heavily contoured cheeks. Without even waiting for an introduction, she spoke with the confident ease of someone who had never been told no. "We're here for the special table," she said, voice syrupy but commanding. "By the windows. I always sit there when I come. The owner and I are close." Marcus arched a single brow, just enough to be noticeable. His smile remained politely neutral. "Of course. May I have the name on the reservation?" She laughed. Not a giggle, but a sharp, dismissive sound, like the idea of needing a reservation was absurd. "Oh, I didn't make one," she said, waving her hand like she was batting away an insect. "But it's fine. Marcus always keeps something open for me. He told me himself. We're very connected." "Marcus?" he echoed, his voice measured. "Yes, Marcus Raines, the owner. Lovely man. We go way back." She leaned in slightly, dropping her sunglasses onto the bridge of her nose to meet his gaze directly. "So, let's not waste time with the formalities, Behind her, the three other women waited awkwardly. One of them glanced at her phone. Another nervously adjusted her jacket. The third looked around the restaurant as if expecting cameras to roll. Marcus knew this performance well. He had encountered many like her in the past, people so soaked in their imagined status that they carried their entitlement like a second skin. But there was something particularly grating in her tone. Something not just entitled, but disdainful. "I see," Marcus said, still composed. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked this evening, and I don't recall," she interrupted, raising a manicured hand. "I think you're confused about how things work here. This table is always available to me. If it isn't, then someone has made a mistake, and you don't want to be that someone, trust me." There it was. That veiled threat masked in politeness, the hallmark of her type. The implication that a single word from her could ruin someone's livelihood. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled at her companions, as if to say, "Watch how I handle this." Then she turned back to Marcus and added in a lower tone, "Besides, do you really want to risk your job over something so trivial?" Marcus met her gaze calmly, his posture unshaken. "And your name, ma'am?" The woman blinked as if the question offended her. "Karen," she said eventually. "Karen Whitmore. I shouldn't have to say that, though. Marcus knows me." Marcus committed the name to memory without a hint of recognition. He had never met her, nor had she ever appeared on the guest lists or email reservations. But rather than confront her then and there, he decided to observe, to give her the space to entrap herself. Not out of cruelty, but from a rising sense of moral clarity. People like Karen thrived because no one ever held them accountable. Not tonight. He smiled again, this time with the faintest flicker of amusement behind his eyes. "My apologies for the confusion, Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly. "Allow me to personally escort you and your guests to your table, the one we always keep available, just in case." Karen grinned triumphantly and turned to the others. "See? Told you. Some of us still have connections." The trio murmured their approval and followed Marcus as he led them down the long hallway toward the east wing of the restaurant. He didn't rush. He walked with the ease of a man on his own terrain. As they moved past the central dining hall, a few guests glanced their way. One nodded to Marcus in greeting. Another offered a quiet smile. Karen took it all as further evidence of her imagined status, oblivious to the fact that the man she had condescended to was the reason any of them were there. As they passed beneath an arched doorway leading into the restricted VIP area, Marcus noticed Karen pulling out her phone to snap a selfie, whispering to her friends about the exclusivity. He said nothing. Let her enjoy it. After all, she was about to learn what that exclusivity cost. The room they entered was known as the Heritage Room, a private chamber rarely used without direct authorization from Marcus himself. It was reserved for world leaders, Hollywood legends, and those whose net worths weren't discussed publicly. Everything, from the silk wallpaper to the imported crystal, screamed luxury. There were no prices on the menu, no printed bills. In here, money wasn't counted in dollars but in discretion and access. Karen practically floated into the room, spinning once in delight. "Oh my God, this is even better than last time," she said, settling into the central chair with the view of the park. "We are definitely doing a full tasting tonight. No holding back, ladies." Marcus handed them elegant leather-bound menus embossed with gold foil and gave the standard opening. "Our chef recommends the 12-course tasting menu this evening, paired with wines selected from our private reserve. Let me know if I can answer any questions. I'll personally be overseeing your service tonight." Karen leaned back, smug. "Perfect. Tell Marcus he did well." Marcus inclined his head and turned, leaving them to their illusion for now. As he stepped out into the hallway and closed the heavy door behind him, his smile faded into thoughtful stillness. He had seen and endured worse in his lifetime: racial slurs, institutional rejection, condescension masked as charity. But there was something uniquely grating about Karen's performance. Not simply her ignorance or lies, but the certainty with which she believed them. The way she had looked at him and seen a servant, not a man. No, tonight wouldn't end the way she expected. Not tonight. Marcus stepped away from the heritage room and moved through the staff hallway with measured, deliberate calm. The hallway, while not meant for guests, was still designed with taste, a subtle reflection of the restaurant's ethos, elegance, even in the unseen. He paused for a moment near the sommelier station, glancing over the wine pairings prepared for the evening's tasting menu. He gave a brief nod of approval before turning to the floor manager, speaking softly, instructing him to prepare full VIP protocol for Table 9, the very one Karen and her entourage now occupied. Though, on paper, Marcus had delegated responsibilities to various department heads, he remained the invisible axis around which the restaurant turned. When he stepped into the heritage room as a maitre d', few questioned his role. When he passed through the kitchen, no one asked what he was doing there. The authority he carried was self-evident, not in a badge or a nameplate, but in how every detail of the restaurant pulsed in rhythm with his presence. He returned to the private dining corridor with a small, inward breath and allowed his posture to shift slightly, not with arrogance but with certainty. He had seen how Karen looked at him, the dismissive tilt of her head, the patronizing tone layered with barely disguised superiority. That alone might have been forgivable. He had long since learned to navigate the social strata of the elite. But it was her casual cruelty, the ease with which she lied and trampled over others, that had turned his attention from tolerance to instruction. When he re-entered the heritage room, Karen was mid-laugh, holding her phone at a flattering angle while pouting dramatically. Her friends were already sipping the complimentary champagne that Marcus had sent in ahead of time, a rare vintage that most connoisseurs would only dream of tasting. None of the women, he noted, had asked its name. They were drinking status, not wine. He greeted them with a warm, formal tone and presented the options for the evening's meal. Karen, now comfortably settled into her illusion of control, declared with a wave of her hand, "We'll do the full experience. Taste and menu, wine pairings, the works, don't hold back." One of her friends, a soft-spoken brunette named Ashley, hesitated. "Are you sure it's not too much?" Karen rolled her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous. Marcus is covering us tonight. He always does when I'm here." She turned to Marcus without even considering that he might not actually be anyone's servant. "Right? He said last time he wants to spoil me." Marcus met her eyes calmly, the corner of his mouth curving in a smile that could be read 1,000 ways. "Of course. We want every guest to feel treasured here." It was technically true. They were going to feel something tonight. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed ballet. The amuse-bouche, microgreens delicately cradled in hand-formed shells of dehydrated apple, topped with a single pearl of caviar, was served with a chilled glass of rare German Riesling. The soup course followed, a frothy bisque made from sea urchin and white asparagus, paired with a buttery Chardonnay aged in French oak. Each dish was a revelation, carefully calibrated not just for flavor but for effect. Karen and her friends gushed, posting every plate on social media, their hashtags flying, #VIPLife, #Marcus always knows, #High Society eats. The wine flowed freely. Marcus ensured that the pairings were generous, 3 to 4 ounces per course instead of the standard pour. After only 3 courses, their laughter had grown louder, their conversation more careless. Karen, emboldened by alcohol and the safety she perceived in her surroundings, began to slip. "I just don't get it," she said, gesturing with a fork while a server cleared plates. "I mean, you work in a place like this, right? Surrounded by money, by class, and yet you choose to serve people. Day in, day out." Her friends giggled. One murmured something about how, "At least it's clean work," prompting another round of laughter. "Seriously," Karen continued, speaking louder now, not caring who might hear. "If I had to smile at strangers for a living, I'd probably lose my mind. But hey, I guess everyone has their place, right?" Marcus, standing just inside the doorway with a fresh bottle of Bordeaux, noted the eyes of the server who had just retreated. She was young, quiet, with braided hair tucked neatly beneath her cap. Her eyes had dimmed with that comment. Marcus made a mental note to thank her later for her professionalism. "I suppose it's all about perspective," he said, his voice still even. "Service can be deeply fulfilling if one believes in what they're offering." Karen chuckled, lifting her glass. "Well, I hope you believe in your tips tonight. We're generous, especially when the food's free." There was a pause in the room, almost imperceptible, like a skipped heartbeat. Then more laughter, high and shrill. The 4th course arrived. Scallops seared in duck fat, served on a puree of roasted sunchokes with saffron foam. The wine now was a Premier Cru Chablis, imported directly from a family vineyard that had been producing for generations. Between bites, Karen leaned over and whispered conspiratorially to her friend Lauren, not quite quiet enough. "He's cute, I'll give him that, but I could never date a waiter. You just know he'd be asking to borrow your credit card by the second date." Lauren giggled but glanced away uncomfortably. Another course arrived, then another. Lobster tail in beurre blanc, Wagyu beef with shaved white truffle, a palate cleanser of blood orange sorbet served in a chilled crystal sphere. The desserts were prepared tableside by the pastry chef himself, a rare gesture. Karen applauded without sincerity, filming every movement, narrating to her followers, "This is what you get when you know the right people." Marcus continued to serve them personally, his demeanor unchanged, even as he listened to every comment, every mocking tone. They spoke as though he were invisible, or worse, an object. He caught snatches of conversation that spoke volumes, musings on how hard it must be to clean up after rich people, how some people are just born servers. Karen seemed particularly proud of a moment when she offered her napkin to the passing sommelier and then laughed when he didn't take it. It was not just entitlement. It was something colder, older, the sort of disdain passed down quietly through generations, polished until it gleamed like virtue. Still, Marcus said nothing. He moved with the same grace, the same poise. His patience was not passive. It was weaponized. As the final course was served, a handcrafted chocolate sphere that melted under a warm pour of raspberry reduction, Marcus stepped away briefly to review the running bill. The cost had risen exactly as he anticipated. Each wine pairing alone was a small fortune, and the exclusivity of the ingredients ensured the price would be astronomical. He returned to the room just as Karen stood, stretching, clearly more than tipsy. "That was incredible," she announced. "Marcus is going to be so thrilled we stopped by. I should really text him." She fumbled for her phone and, after a few drunken swipes, pretended to type a message. He always says I'm his favorite guest. Marcus simply smiled. The room had quieted slightly now. The early buzz had dulled. The servers began to clear dishes with quiet efficiency. Karen's companions were starting to show signs of discomfort, not from the food or drink, but from the slowly dawning realization that they may have overplayed their hand. Karen remained oblivious. "Can we get the bill?" she asked with a yawn. "I want to see how generous I feel tonight." "As you wish," Marcus replied. He turned and walked to the front of the restaurant, where he retrieved the itemized bill, printed on thick, embossed stationery, as was customary for the Heritage Room. He reviewed it one last time, ensuring every item was listed clearly. No tricks, no hidden charges. Every glass poured, every ounce served, every luxury consumed. He returned to the Heritage Room and gently placed the bill in front of Karen. "Here you are, Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly. "Thank you for dining with us this evening." Karen reached for it with a lazy smile, then froze. The numbers stared back at her like a silent accusation. The subtotal alone was higher than her monthly rent in her Manhattan condo. Her fingers twitched. She blinked once, twice. This has to be a mistake," she said finally, her voice higher now, thinned with disbelief. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is there something on the bill you did not order?" Karen said nothing. The quiet in the room was suddenly sharp, like the edge of a blade, and Marcus knew the lesson had only just begun. Karen stared at the bill as if it were written in a foreign language, her carefully painted face draining of color beneath the soft lighting of the Heritage Room. For a moment, the silence in the room was complete. Even her ever-chatty entourage had fallen still, watching her with widening eyes. The heavy, cream-colored card trembled slightly in her manicured fingers. The bold number at the bottom, $18,472, seemed to pulse with quiet power, almost mocking in its finality. "What is this?" she asked, her voice no longer commanding, but shrill, uncertain. "Is this a joke?" Marcus, standing beside the table with practiced calm, tilted his head slightly, as if confused by her reaction. "Not at all, Miss Whitmore. That is the accurate total for the 12-course tasting menu, wine pairings, and exclusive seating in the Heritage Room. All selections were made by you and confirmed throughout the evening." But this can't be right," she stammered, flipping the bill over as if a more favorable version might be hiding on the reverse. "This is outrageous. I was told this would be complimentary." "I don't believe any such statement was made," Marcus replied evenly. "No such arrangement exists on your guest profile." Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She glanced at her friends, who now seemed less like loyal companions and more like startled bystanders. Ashley was biting her lip. Lauren had begun fiddling nervously with her napkin. The last one, Nicole, perhaps, looked away entirely, her expression unreadable. Karen drew herself up again, summoning the full force of her practiced indignation. "Listen," she said, voice shaking more from emotion than volume. "I am personal friends with the owner, Marcus Raines. This has to be some mistake. He always comps my dinners." Marcus didn't blink. "Miss Whitmore," he said gently, "you have made that claim several times this evening, and as I've said, I am Marcus Raines." For a heartbeat, no one reacted. The words hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. Then Karen laughed, a high, forced sound. "You're joking. No, you can't be. You're the maitre d', the floor manager, the owner," Marcus said firmly, "and the chef, and the founder of Heritage. Every aspect of this restaurant, from the floorboards to the menus, bears my signature, including the bill you now hold." Karen stared at him, and for the first time that evening, her expression betrayed something deeper than arrogance. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear, the kind that seeped in when entitlement collided with truth. "But no, this can't," she began, her words collapsing in on themselves. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, the mood in the room turning dense with shame. They had all played along with Karen's fantasy, happily riding the wave of her false status, her constant brags about knowing the right people, her unrelenting condescension toward those she deemed beneath her. And now, in the golden light of the Heritage Room, it was all unraveling. Marcus took a small step back to give her space and offered no further commentary. He had no need to gloat. The silence was more effective than any rebuke. Karen stared at the total again. Her eyes darted to the line items, each course, each pour, each indulgence documented in crisp, elegant script. There was no denying it. The amount was real. Desperation flickered behind her eyes. She clutched her phone like a life raft and began frantically scrolling. "I'll text him," she muttered. "I'll show you. I have messages from Marcus. I can prove it." Marcus didn't move, watching her with the patience of a man who had seen this exact dance before. Karen quickly opened a thread in her messages and turned the screen toward him. "See? Marcus, owner, he confirmed everything." The screen showed a recent conversation with someone named Marcus Owner. The tone was casual, filled with affirmations. "Of course, Karen. Anything for you. The usual table is yours. Don't worry about the bill." Marcus studied it briefly, then tapped the contact name and opened the info. The number was not his. Not even close. Likely a friend, or perhaps one of her accomplices, hastily renamed in her contacts during her brief visit to the restroom. "I'm afraid that number isn't mine," Marcus said softly, "and those messages were fabricated, likely during your absence earlier." Karen's face flushed bright red. "You can't prove that." "I don't need to," Marcus replied. "You made your selections. You consumed the meal. The bill stands." The room fell silent again. Karen's bravado was gone. In its place, a volatile mix of shame and indignation rose, twisting her features into something almost unrecognizable. She turned to her friends, eyes pleading. "Girls, come on. You said you'd help if anything happened." Ashley looked down at her lap. I mean, you said it was covered." Lauren swallowed hard, then reached into her clutch, pulling out a few 20s. Nicole followed suit, offering a few crumpled bills without speaking. Between them, they had maybe $300. A small dent in a very large problem. Karen's breathing grew shallow. She turned back to Marcus. "You have to reduce this. Cut it in half, at least. This is ridiculous." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Marcus replied. "All services were rendered, and you received the full experience of our most exclusive package." "I'll report this," Karen snapped, "to the Better Business Bureau, to the press, to your investors." "You are welcome to do so," Marcus said, "but I would advise against false claims, especially given that we have full audio and video surveillance of this room." Karen's eyes widened. "You were recording us." "For quality assurance," Marcus explained, "as is customary in our private dining suites, and as stated on the agreement each guest signs before entering." Karen's hands trembled. "This is insane." "This is heritage," Marcus said simply. A moment passed, then another. Finally, with visible reluctance, Karen pulled out her wallet and produced her platinum card. Her hands were shaking so violently that she fumbled the handoff, nearly dropping it. Marcus accepted it without comment and walked to the exit. Behind him, the women whispered in hushed, tense voices. One of them had started crying quietly. None of them made eye contact with Karen. At the front desk, Marcus handed the card to the head of accounts and quietly instructed her to process the charge. He returned to the heritage room with the receipt, setting it gently on the table beside Karen. "You've been charged in full," he said. "A gratuity of 20% was added, as is customary for the heritage room. Thank you for dining with us." Karen didn't look at him. She scribbled her signature with shaking fingers, her face a pale mask of humiliation. As Marcus turned to leave, she finally found her voice again, this time small, bitter, and unconvincing. "You know, you won't get away with this. People talk." "Yes," Marcus said without turning, "they do." And with that, he stepped through the door, leaving Karen and her illusions behind. In the quiet aftermath, the other guests of the heritage room trickled out into the night, their expressions guarded but alert. Some had overheard fragments of the scene. Some had only seen the shift in mood. But word would spread. Stories always did. As Marcus returned to his office and closed the door behind him, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. Not satisfaction. He took no pleasure in humiliation. But there was a grim necessity in it. People like Karen wielded entitlement like a weapon, cutting through others without ever facing consequence. Tonight, she had faced one. He sat at his desk, the quiet hum of the city just beyond the windows. On the corner of the desk lay a copy of the evening's final bill, printed in duplicate. He slid it into an empty frame and placed it beside the others, a quiet reminder that dignity, once dismissed, had a way of returning with interest. When Karen's signature landed on the final stroke of the receipt, the once commanding woman now resembled a ghost of herself. The proud, theatrical presence that had marched into the restaurant hours earlier was gone. Reduced to a shaky hand clutching a pen, her lips pressed into a bitter line. The room that had earlier buzzed with her laughter and narcissistic commentary now sat heavy in silence, as if the luxury itself had turned inward to observe her reckoning. Marcus returned the signed receipt to the leather folio and gave a polite nod. He did not gloat. He did not smile. There was nothing to celebrate in this transaction, only a form of balance being restored. As he turned to leave, Karen slumped back in her chair, exhaling like someone who had just walked out of a courtroom with a guilty verdict. Her friends didn't speak. The dissonance of their evening was overwhelming. They had dressed for a glamorous night out, snapped photos of rare dishes, bragged to their modest social media followings about the exclusivity of their table, and now sat in the uncomfortable aftermath of a fabricated reality. They had never truly questioned Karen's assertions, never challenged her smug certainty that the world revolved around her whims. But now, with a 5-figure bill paid and the truth laid bare, the air between them had shifted. Nicole was the first to stand. She reached for her clutch and adjusted her jacket with slow, deliberate movements, eyes downcast. Lauren followed, her smile tight, her hands nervously brushing her skirt. Ashley lingered a moment longer, then whispered something almost inaudible before following the others out of the room. Karen remained seated, staring into the folds of the white tablecloth as if it could offer her escape. Marcus stepped through the corridor and into the main dining room where the flow of service continued without a hitch. Most guests remained unaware of the storm that had passed through the private suite. That was part of the beauty of heritage. its ability to absorb moments of drama without ever breaking rhythm. He greeted a regular couple with a nod, accepted a compliment from a guest about the venison carpaccio, and checked in with the kitchen before returning briefly to his office. He sat down at his desk, the framed bill now occupying a proud spot among others like it. A quiet gallery of stories with names left off for discretion, each representing a night where ego met reality. Some came from celebrities who had demanded outrageous privileges and been denied, others from politicians who assumed their title bought indulgence. And now Karen Whitmore joined their silent ranks. He looked at the name written in hurried cursive and wondered, just briefly, what her version of the evening would be. He imagined the narrative forming in her mind: a simple mistake, a misunderstanding, an unjust trick played by a deceitful restaurant. Perhaps, by morning, she'd believe it herself. People like Karen rarely admitted they were wrong. They rewrote the past until they were the victim of it. But Marcus didn't care for her story. His was the only one that mattered in that room. 2 days passed without incident. The routine of Heritage returned to its polished norm. The weekend brought more guests, more exquisite dishes, more photos of the wine tower, and custom dessert cards. Marcus oversaw it all with the same even-keeled focus, never mentioning the previous Friday's events to his staff. He trusted them to maintain discretion. They always had. Then, on Monday afternoon, the unexpected happened. His assistant, Clara, appeared at the office door, knocking softly before entering. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was polite and even. "There's a gentleman at the bar asking for you," she said. He wouldn't give his name, but he said he's here about a recent incident involving his daughter. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and followed Clara through the back hallway that led to the guest side of the bar. There, seated stiffly on one of the high leather stools, was a tall man in a tailored overcoat. His posture was immaculate, his features weathered but commanding. And beside him, looking as if she wanted to sink into the earth, sat Karen Whitmore. Marcus paused just a moment before stepping into view. The man stood, extending a hand. "You must be Mr. Raines." Marcus accepted it, feeling the firm pressure of a practiced handshake. "I am. I'm Thomas Whitmore. I believe there was an incident involving my daughter Friday night." Karen didn't speak. Her eyes remained fixed on the surface of the bar. Her makeup was subtle this time, as if she had come not for performance, but for damage control. "I'd like to speak with you privately, if you have a moment," Thomas said. Marcus gestured toward the corridor. "Of course." He led them to his office and motioned toward the leather chairs facing his desk. Thomas sat. Karen hesitated, then slowly followed. "I understand there was a rather large bill and some disagreement," Thomas began. "Karen has told me her version, but I'd like to hear yours." Marcus remained standing for a moment, then moved behind his desk and unlocked the drawer containing the security archive. He placed a remote on the desk and turned the screen toward them. "Rather than explain," he said, "I think it's best you see it yourself." He tapped the remote and the footage began to play. The camera's view was clear, centered on the Heritage Room table, with crisp audio capturing every laugh, every comment, every insult. The meal played out again, not in color and taste but in cold truth. Karen's confident posturing, her demeaning comments to the staff, her disdain for Marcus himself, believing him to be a mere employee. The moment she referred to him as just a waiter and dismissed his intelligence. The manufactured text messages, the demand for a discount, the eventual breakdown. As the footage played, Thomas sat still. His expression hardened. His jaw flexed once. Karen remained frozen, eyes glued to the screen, the weight of her words crashing down anew. When the video ended, Marcus turned off the screen. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Thomas stood slowly. "Thank you," he said. His voice was flat, controlled. "That was illuminating." He turned to his daughter. "Wait for me outside." Karen opened her mouth to protest, then thought better of it. She stood and walked to the door, her heels clicking softly against the floor. When she was gone, Thomas looked at Marcus. "Let me start by saying this. I'm ashamed. Deeply ashamed." Marcus didn't respond. "I raised my children with values, or I thought I did. I knew Karen could be entitled, but I never imagined she would speak to anyone like that. Especially you." "There's nothing special about me," Marcus said calmly. "No one deserves that kind of treatment." Thomas nodded, visibly struggling. "You're right. No one does. I've spoken with her mother. We'll be handling this internally. I don't expect you to forgive her. I wouldn't in your place. But I wanted to come here and look you in the eye as a man and say I'm sorry." Marcus studied him. There was no deception in the man's voice, no attempts to spin the story, to shift blame, just raw, honest contrition. "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "Most wouldn't bother." "She'll be losing a lot because of this," Thomas added. "Rightfully so, but I needed to see it for myself." He offered his hand again. Marcus accepted it. When Thomas left, he said nothing more to Karen. He simply walked out, his shoulders tight with shame. Karen lingered a moment longer at the door, her eyes meeting Marcus's for the first time since that night. They were not pleading or angry, just hollow. She turned and left without a word. Marcus sat down again, the room now empty. Outside, the noise of the restaurant continued, glasses clinking, low conversation, the subtle rustle of movement. He looked once more at the framed bill. $18,472. Some debts were monetary, others were moral. Karen had paid the first. Whether she would ever understand the second, Marcus doubted, but at least now she would remember. The door clicked shut behind Karen Whitmore, its sound quiet, final. Marcus remained seated at his desk, the framed bill still positioned at the edge of the polished wood, a silent monument to everything that had transpired. Outside his office, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, untouched by the tremor that had just passed through. That was the paradox of places like Heritage. They endured. They carried themselves through indulgence, elegance, and silence. No matter the drama that came and went, the walls held their composure. But inside, Marcus sat still, allowing the last echo of her presence to settle. He wasn't angry, not anymore. What he had felt in the moment, frustration, disbelief, even indignation, had long since faded. In its place was something quieter and heavier, a sense of inevitability. He had known people like Karen all his life, people who believed the world owed them something because of their skin, their family, their money. People who mistook their unearned comfort for divine right. People who, above all, never imagined someone like him, black, composed, and in control, could be anything more than a fixture in their background. Now, perhaps she knew. Later that evening, Clara entered the office once more. She closed the door gently behind her and stood in front of the desk with the practiced ease of someone who had worked beside Marcus for years. "She's trending," she said. He looked up from the schedule he'd been reviewing. "Karen?" Clara nodded. "A video, not from our footage. someone else. One of her friends, I think. Maybe Lauren or Nicole. It's on TikTok, Instagram, even Twitter. Clips from the night. No audio at first, just shots of the food, the wine, the plates, the bill. And then it cuts to her face when you told her who you were. Marcus's expression didn't change. How many views? Over 400,000 in the last 3 hours, Clara said. It's spreading fast. People are reposting it with commentary, the usual hashtags. #Karen, #entitlement, #know the owner. Some are calling it poetic justice, others are harsher. He exhaled slowly and leaned back. Did they mention the restaurant by name? Yes, but we're being praised. People are admiring the restraint, the professionalism. Your name is getting passed around, too. He looked past her to the tall windows. Night had fully fallen over the city. The skyline shimmered through the glass, vibrant and unbothered. I didn't want this, he said after a moment. Not the attention, not the shame. I just wanted her to see herself, to see what she looked like when no one played along. I know, Clara replied gently, but people are hungry for accountability, and now they've found an example. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood and moved to the wall where several framed photos hung. Some were of him and world-renowned chefs in Paris, Tokyo, Johannesburg. Others were candid shots, his mother in her nurse's uniform, his father behind the counter at the old diner in Atlanta, the original location that had sparked his dream. He stared at them a moment longer than usual, then turned back. Keep monitoring it, he said. Let me know if the tone shifts, if anything crosses a line. Clara nodded. Of course. She left him alone again, the office quiet once more. By the next morning, the story had reached national coverage. Not with the explosive force of a scandal, but with the steady interest of a slow-burning reckoning. The video had been reposted by influencers, bloggers, and think pieces began to appear. Some focused on the entitlement of the rich, others on the subtle racism Karen had displayed. Still, others applauded Marcus for not humiliating her further, for allowing her to expose herself. Her name was trending alongside terms like privilege check and restaurant justice. The company where Karen worked, an upscale human resources consultancy, was quickly inundated with comments and calls. Their social media pages were flooded with screenshots, demands, and, eventually, apologies. By noon, the company released a brief statement. We are aware of the video circulating online and are conducting an internal investigation. We do not tolerate discriminatory or unprofessional behavior from any employee, regardless of seniority. By 4, Karen's LinkedIn page was gone. By 6, multiple job postings from the same company had removed her name from current projects. She had been let go. Marcus read the updates in silence, his expression unreadable. He didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory. It was fallout. He thought of her father, dignified, ashamed, trying to make sense of what his daughter had done. Marcus had seen something in that man's eyes, not just disappointment, but the raw grief of someone watching his legacy unravel in real time. The next day, a handwritten note arrived at the restaurant. It was left at the front desk, folded into an unsealed envelope. No return address, no sender. Clara brought it to Marcus during lunch service. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was deliberate, slightly shaky. Mr. Raines, there is nothing I can say that will undo the shame I brought to myself, to my family, and to your establishment. I know you didn't ask for this. I know you didn't deserve what I said, how I acted, or the way I carried myself in your presence. I have lost my job. I have lost friends. I've lost more than I realized I could in a single weekend. But the thing I cannot stop thinking about is the look on your face when I called you a waiter. You didn't react. You didn't lash out. You just stood there and let me walk straight into the truth. That truth has shaken me. For the first time in my life, I'm questioning who I've become. You didn't owe me kindness, but you gave it. You didn't humiliate me, even when you could have. Instead, you let me see myself. That is more terrifying than anything you could have said. I am sorry. Truly. Karen. He read it twice, then a third time. He didn't share it with anyone. He placed it in the drawer of his desk beside a photo of his mother smiling outside the hospital she'd worked at for 37 years. The restaurant moved on. New guests came. Reviews poured in. The reservation list grew even longer. Some guests asked if the story was true. Marcus always gave the same answer. Some stories are better when left without embellishment. A week later, a young black couple came into the restaurant. They had saved for months for this dinner, the man explained, and they had chosen Heritage not just for the food, but for the story. They had watched the video together, both in tears, and decided that someday they would sit at one of these tables, not because they were rich or powerful, but because they deserved to take up space in beautiful places. Marcus greeted them personally. He guided them to a corner table with a perfect view of the city skyline and made sure their evening was unforgettable. That night, after closing, he returned to his office and sat in silence. The framed bill remained. The drawer with Karen's letter remained. But something in the room felt lighter. Consequences came in many forms. For some, they arrived with fire and fury. For others, with silence and stillness. And for Karen Whitmore, they had arrived not just in the total on a receipt, but in the mirror she had been forced to face. Even in the calmest moments of the evening, after the last candle had burned low and the clink of silverware had faded to memory, the Heritage restaurant never truly slept. The walls, lined with quiet luxury, seemed to hum with the echoes of conversations and laughter, whispers of deals struck, anniversaries celebrated, and lives, for a few fleeting hours, made to feel perfect. Marcus had always believed that a restaurant should be a sanctuary, not just from hunger, but from the noise of the world outside. It should make people feel seen, understood, welcomed, but it should never be a place where someone's dignity was offered up for another's sense of superiority. The week following Karen Whitmore's very public collapse had brought more attention than Marcus had ever desired. The restaurant's website was flooded with reservation requests, their phone lines constantly busy, inboxes stacked with messages of support, inquiries, and unsolicited press requests. Major publications reached out for interviews. Influencers and columnists tried to book the infamous Heritage Room, some even requesting to be served by the owner himself. Marcus declined all of them. He wasn't interested in making a spectacle of another person's downfall, even if the world craved one. But the moment wasn't lost on him either. Something had shifted, not only in the public's perception of him, but in his own sense of place. For years, he had worked behind the veil of perfectionism and professionalism, knowing that for a black man to command such a rarefied space in a city like New York, he had to be more than excellent. He had to be unassailable. One mistake, one misstep, and all of it could be questioned, not just by critics or investors, but by people like Karen, whose assumptions were baked into the very foundations of society. That realization did not make him bitter. It made him precise. On a quiet Monday morning, before the first delivery truck arrived and before the staff clocked in, Marcus entered his office and closed the door behind him. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, cutting through the hush like a warm blade. He stood in front of the small gallery wall, frames neatly spaced, each one housing an artifact of history. They were not trophies. There were no awards, no glowing reviews. Instead, they were records. Moments when the line between privilege and arrogance had been drawn with ink and signature. The latest frame was already prepared. It held the printed receipt from the infamous Friday night, its heading embossed with the restaurant's seal, the total in bold, elegant script at the bottom, $18,472. Beneath the receipt, a brass plate had been affixed. It read simply, "Entitlement, when unchecked, always comes with a price." He hung the frame in the empty space between two others. To the left was a bill signed by a tech mogul who had demanded a table last minute, insulting the staff before learning that Marcus owned the place. To the right, a receipt from a senator's assistant who had once tried to bully her way to the chef's table with false promises of career opportunities. Each one was a reminder that ego, no matter how polished, was brittle. Marcus stepped back and looked at the wall. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't ashamed either. The wall was not about revenge. It was about remembering, and perhaps about healing. Later that afternoon, he walked the floor of the restaurant, pausing at each table, greeting guests with the same quiet sincerity that had made him beloved by regulars. Most said nothing about the video, though their eyes lingered on him a moment longer than usual, filled with admiration or perhaps silent acknowledgement. A few asked subtle questions. Was it real? Did that really happen? To which Marcus always gave the same response. Sometimes life writes its own menu. That evening, as the last few tables dined under the soft glow of the chandeliers, a young black couple approached the host stand. The man wore a tailored suit with slightly worn cuffs, his shoes polished but creased. The woman, tall and graceful, carried herself with quiet pride, her natural curls pulled into a simple bun, her dress elegant but modest. "We're here for a 7:30 reservation," the man said, "under James Porter." The host smiled. "Yes, of course, right this way." Marcus, passing nearby, caught the name. He turned and met their eyes. "Mr. Porter?" he asked. "Welcome, I'm Marcus Raines." The man's expression shifted, a spark of recognition lighting in his eyes. "I know who you are, sir. We've read about you. We watched the video. It meant something to us." Marcus shook his hand. "I'm honored you chose to dine with us." "We've saved for 6 months," the woman said, her smile soft. "Not just for the food, for the experience, for what this place stands for." Marcus felt the weight of their words settle somewhere deep in his chest. It wasn't about the meal. It wasn't even about the incident. It was about belonging, about reclaiming a space that for so long had been denied to people who looked like him, like them. He personally led them to a table near the corner window, where the city lights stretched endlessly into the night. He ensured they received the finest service, not because of who they were or what they said, but because they, like every other guest, deserved it. As the evening wore on, Marcus watched them laugh, toast to their future, and savor each bite. They weren't wealthy, they weren't powerful, but they were present, and that was everything. After they left, he returned to his office and opened the drawer where Karen's letter still rested. He hadn't responded. He didn't plan to. It wasn't about forgiveness. Some things weren't his to give. What mattered was that the letter had been written at all. There had been no further contact from her or her father. The media, starved for new drama, had moved on to fresher scandals. Karen's story, while still accessible online, had faded from trending lists, but Marcus knew it would linger in other ways. In boardrooms and brunch tables, and whispered conversations about consequence and image. Perhaps, for some, it would be a cautionary tale. For others, a moment of clarity. For Marcus, it was simply another chapter. That night, long after the last guest had departed and the last light had been dimmed, Marcus walked once more through the heritage room. He stood at the center of the space, surrounded by the echo of polished glass and fine linen. He thought of everything this room had seen. Celebrations, confessions, performances, reckonings. He thought of Karen. Not with hatred, not even with anger. Just with the quiet understanding that the world she had believed in no longer existed. Or perhaps it never had. It had only been protected by silence. But silence, he had learned, was not always the same as peace. He turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. In the office, the framed bill glimmered faintly in the dark, catching the last sliver of city light through the window. It would stay there. Not to shame her, but to remind him, to remind everyone. Some lessons cost nothing. Others cost $18,472. And some, like respect, dignity, and truth, are priceless. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see what happens when entitlement meets reality again. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see it.